everyone. Happy Tuesday. Did you guys all survive Snowmageddon? As we all know, many parts of the United States, including your oh so humble narrator, got absolutely buried this weekend. I want to say we got close to, if not more than, 2 feet of snow. That, my friends, is a lot of snow. But my power remained intact, my heat warming my cockles, and safe with all of the family, even if they all had school canceled the last 2 days, Monday and Tuesday. School canceled. Would you believe it? Lazy children. Well, not exactly their choice, but what can you do? Well, I'm happy to have you all here with me tonight as we will be preparing to get into more reading of The Flow, a hedonist guide to Buddhism, meditation, and travels in Thailand, a travelogue memoir by Lawrence Davidson. So, Saturday, I got about 2 chapters in. We still had about 15 minutes left before my normal hour and a half into the stream. And so I figured, hey, we'll run a little bit over. We'll go ahead and have an extra chapter in there. Maybe 15 minutes over. And then that next chapter went for an hour and a half. Ah, so needless to say, I ran a little bit longer than I anticipated last time around, but it was okay because they was good reads. We got to look at our humble author going to a an elephant sanctuary. Let's see, what all did we look at last week? Hold on. Wait 1 minute. Let me look at the chapter titles. Because nicely, when I get off of this mountain, I know where I want to go. We read through that one. Went to a cooking class with some of the other monks that he had went to. Then, Are You Happy to See Me? An Elephant in the Room. Went to a elephant sanctuary. And then Welcome to the Jungle, Notes from a Forest Monastery. He got to start his journey there at the monastery, gave us a little bit of an idea of some of the stuff that they did, the chores that they went through, that kind of thing. And then talked about a festival that they got to go and see, which he advocated for, and the head monks gave the thumbs up. If you missed any of it, of course, it is available on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SirArminius for your listening and watching pleasure. Because that's what it's there for. That's why it's there. So that way you can enjoy along with all of the rest of us. And so tonight we're going to get back into it, starting in chapter 8. And we'll see how far we make it in tonight. I am not going to get myself into the point where I'm at another 2.5 hour read. I don't mind doing those every once in a while, but my voice does start to give out a little bit after some time because, well, I'm reading straight to you. There's not a lot of opportunity to stop in there for a drink, something to wet my whistle, which any voiceover actor will tell you that when you are doing your voiceover stuff, you need to be hydrating regularly Because if you are not hydrating regularly, then your throat starts to dry out and all of those fun things. So when I am doing the longer narrations, it doesn't necessarily work out the way I would want it to because I'm spending more time speaking and less time able to consume beverages. But hey, what are you going to do? That's the behind the scenes things that you never knew you never wanted to know. But now you do. And so, we'll see how this evening goes. Hopefully, we don't run into any kind of those issues. And instead, we just have some fun as we go through. As a reminder to you all, we are going through a story that is set in Thailand at a Buddhist monastery and various other places throughout Thailand. There are going to be terms in this reading that I am unfamiliar with. I am going to have Buddhist terms, I'm going to have Pali terms, I am going to have Thai words that I just don't know. And I do my very best to speak them as I believe they are supposed to be spoken. However, there is a very good chance that I screw it up. I appreciate your understanding of this as a native English speaker. Thai dialect has sounds that we don't use in English speaking, which presents issues at times. So know that I am doing my best. I am, you know, very understanding that I did wrong because I'm not perfect. I screw up on English words sometimes, let alone talking about words in a foreign language that I do not speak. So your understanding is greatly appreciated, and you are welcome to put your thoughts and comments and corrections to my pronunciations into the chat. I record all of these, of course. I may not be able to see or respond to your correction in the moment, but when I can, I will. And now, depending on where you are, grab yourself a warm drink, a cold drink, a blanket, put your feet up, get a little cozy. Maybe you're listening and doing chores, throwing those AirPods, headphones, whatever it happens to be. Sit back, relax, and prepare to enjoy as we dive into another session of The Flow, a hedonist guide to Buddhism, meditation, and travels in Thailand, a travelogue memoir by Lawrence Davidson. If you happen to be on Rumble or on YouTube, I have the links for the author in the description. There should be a couple of links there. Check them out. Pick up the book if you are so interested and read along or just read on your own or support the indie author. Now, let's go ahead and dive in with Chapter 8, Head Shaved and Ordination, a Radical Shift. As once famously neurotic bald man once said about confidence in the bald man. Well, I'll let him keep the quote. But he wasn't wrong. If you are curious, look up Larry David's great line. When you make the decision to participate in monastic life, it's not something you stumble into like a yoga retreat with robes. It's a commitment. Real, deliberate, and definitely not half-assed. Part of that commitment is studying and adhering to the disciplined lifestyle you're about to live, including, at the very least, adhering to the eight precepts. And a part of that commitment is participating in all ceremonies with an open heart, a willing spirit, and ideally, without trying to sneak in snacks. November 5th, 2024. Praveja Rehearsal Day. The first ceremony that demanded our full presence, not just physically, but soulfully, is the head shaving ritual called Praveja. In the West, we blandly refer to it as tonsure, which sounds like something you'd get at a spa with cucumber water. But no, this isn't a casual spin in the barber's chair where you chat about Giants box scores and who they're trading next season. This is a rite of passage, a mandana. Praveja, the day of mandana, is thick with symbolism and ceremony. The literal translation means to go forth. Its historical lineage dating back to the Vedic writings and rituals. It marks the transition of an ordinary man into bhikkhu, a monk, and it begins with the very literal stripping away of ego. Your head is shaved, your eyebrows too, and of course the regulation face scrape. Everything goes. In the Buddhist view, facial and head hair are signs of vanity, and vanity has got no place under the Bodhi tree. According to Vinaya, the ancient rulebook of the Buddhist canon, head shaving isn't a one time ego purge. It's a regular ritual done on every new and full moon, a Posada day, which averages out to twice a month. Though, as I quickly learned, plenty of monks just go ahead and shave it all off every single day. Bald is beautiful and apparently spiritually efficient. We knew this day was coming. Most of us approached it with a mix of curiosity and mild dread, especially our brother Peace Love from California, whose magnificent golden dreadlocks had become something of a legend. If you've ever grown dreads, you understand. This wasn't just a haircut, it was a full on sacrificial offering. His hair was a lifestyle, symbolic, and possibly had its own glossy magazine. Another source of my personal unease? Eyebrows. Specifically, the unsettling rumor that once you shave them off after a certain age, they may never return. Or worse, they might come back all wiry and chaotic, like an aged mad professor who's just seen something unspeakable in his particle accelerator. I didn't want that energy permanently affixed to my face. And then there was the weather. It had been solid gray and rainy for the week. Not a dramatic monsoon, just a slow, moody drizzle. Cool but not cold, persistent and wet enough to make the idea of bare feet and ceremonial smocks feel less sacred and more soggy. The I Retreat complex, located across a small bridge that spanned the Luang River, around a couple bends and up the mud slicked dirt road, was our sister complex to I Monastery, and was for lay Buddhists to stay at, meditate, and receive some Dhamma wisdom without taking vows of monkhood. Much of I Retreat was still under construction, but the crown jewel of the facility was a stunning open sided pavilion with a soaring roof, had been completed in the nick of time, as if the universe demanded it be there for our big debut. It was beautiful, and our ceremony would be its grand opening act. We climbed the gently sloping road, winding past vegetable patches and fruit trees, then up and back behind the pavilion to a makeshift, questionably engineered wooden staircase leading to a longhouse. It creaked ominously. Nails protruded at just the right height to snag a shin or a robe, a gentle reminder that enlightenment can still involve tetanus. Once again, the Bante roll came calling, which meant I'd be leading the Sangha. Inside the pavilion, the setup was impressive. A large U shaped arrangement of stations, seven on each side, with a long table at the bottom of the U for visiting dignitaries. Outside the U ring was set up for family and guests. Cushions, chairs, and benches all in place. The middle layer was occupied by low tables for our bowls and other ceremonial necessities, and the innermost ring was where we would sit, facing outward, awaiting our transformation. Behind our chairs, ample space had been left for the honored guest barbers, those joining in the privilege of shearing away our hair, one symbolic snip at a time. For them, it was a spiritual honor. For us, it was the beginning of something else entirely. Down those treacherous stairs, then a hard left, followed by 14 slick, grassy, and now quite swampy steps across a makeshift wooden walkway that flexed, bowed, and groaned underfoot, and finally onto the stone pavilion floor. From there, we followed the arc of the elongated U, starting from the right, continuing around until the U was filled and each of us landed behind our assigned seats. All of this was to be executed at a slow, dignified pace, timed to some rather enthusiastic music flowing through a PA system. This was not a casual stroll. It was an exercise in choreographed poise. Chin high, eyes forward, an expression of serene detachment on our faces, or our best attempt at one while sloshing through wet grass. We each carried a ceremonial platter, large, lacquered, and solemn, its contents arranged just so: banana leaves serving as an elegant placemat, trimming and shaving tools laid out on top. It was meant to project grace and gravitas. I was wet, anxious, and trying to ignore the fact that a leech had taken up residence on my person. A tiny, bloated Count Dracula happily gorged himself on my ankle. Because a Praveja ceremony is steeped in history and symbolism, we were encouraged to invite loved ones to witness it. I had no one to invite. Or, more truthfully, no one would come if I had. Others did. Their families showed up in full force. Mothers, fathers, partners, old friends flying in from New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam, the US, and Europe. They came with flowers, smiles, and tears. I stood to the side, watching it all unfold, feeling something like awe laced with ache. I hadn't realized how profound this moment would be, not only for us as we surrendered our hair, ego, and names, but for those who came to witness our transformation. When rehearsals finally wrapped, our teachers gave their approval. I got glowing marks for leadership, which inflated me just enough to imagine I might actually pull this thing off with dignity. My brothers and I made our way back down the muddy road to the monastery. I was eager to get that blood sucking worm, who was now bloated, off my foot. I showered in the hottest water I could stand, changed into dry clothes, and joined the others for hot tea, cocoa, or coffee. We lounged and chatted, waiting for evening meditation and bed. I woke the next morning to the patter of rain so relentless it sounded like it was trying to tunnel through the thatched roof. Thunder rolled in like a cosmic timpani section. Any hope for a mild, sunny ceremony evaporated. The day was dark, the air cool and wet. The road to the monastery was tough on a good day. That day, it was borderline biblical. After our morning obligations, back we trudged to I Retreat, where music and an MC's warm up chatter already filled the air. It was early, but the show was underway. There was no going back, and no rain delay announced by Buddhist umpires. At least we had umbrellas. Up in the jungle longhouse, perched high above the pavilion, we waited. We'd been issued our first ceremonial shirts, poncho style tops in blue, red, and black colors, paired with pale blue sarongs. We milled about, sipping hot tea, water, or sodas, nervous energy fizzing just under the surface. Monks flitted around us like high school prom chaperones, attentive and a little giddy. It was all somehow both sacred and completely human. There was a strange vibe in the room. The usual talkers had gone quiet, pacing off alone. The introverts were suddenly chatty and aglow. It felt like we had all stepped into an alternate universe where everyone responded to stress by swapping personalities. Some brothers took the ceremony with profound solemnity. their expressions reflecting the deep weight of tradition. Others seemed to treat it like a cultural excursion with spiritual flair. I sat somewhere in between. I felt the weight of it, this rite of passage, the ancient thread we were all weaving into. But I also couldn't shake the surreal awareness that I'd be back in linen pants and eating from street carts in a few weeks. For all the ceremony's gravitas, I knew of only two of us who had plans to continue their monastic training beyond the month. And yet, there was something about it. Leading these men felt apocal, sacred, temporary, yes, but very real. Being Bante, as I've said, came with certain privileges, some small, some profound. This one stopped me in my tracks. Luang P. Phop, my indefatigable monk mentor with the calm patience of a saint and the bounce of a Buddhist golden retriever, pulled me aside just before the ceremony. Because I was Bante and had no family here, I was being granted a great honor. Fornsan Kamlang Ek herself would serve as my ceremonial mother. This was not some symbolic gesture made for convenience. In Thai culture, the role of a mother, biological or ceremonial, is imbued with immense spiritual weight, especially during rites of passage. To be given a mother is to be given a lineage, a place, a kind of invisible scaffolding of belonging. And I was being given Forsan Kamleng Ek, the formidable matriarch behind the entire monk life project. Alongside her husband, General Arthit, she had built this cross continental initiative up from a disheveled organization, personally shaping the path that brought so many of us to this moment of transformation. I nodded, mouth dry, heart pounding. The others had their mothers or fathers, siblings, and friends. I had Fornsan Kamleng Ek, which is kind of like showing up to the prom with the Queen of Thailand as your dance partner. It was absurd, it was overwhelming, and it was one of the greatest honors of my life. My first thought, doesn't she have more important things to do? Apparently not. She would be with me through all three, yep, count 'em, three ceremonies. It was time. I rose on the cue from Luang P. Phop and led our group in orderly file to the launch spot at the top of the steps, trying to keep the rain from my eyes, waiting for the green light from ceremonial ops. Word came. Phop gave me his trademark grin and nod, and as I turned the corner and descended the steps, leading our stately little monk parade, I realized the pavilion was packed. I mean, packed. Crammed wall to wall with people. I didn't have the foggiest idea where they had come from. I retreat is in the middle of nowhere. I was half convinced these people were forest spirits or mushroom fairies who had sprouted from the mud and mist, popping into existence in our small space in the world, because Chiang Mai is 2 hours away and it had been raining for days. Tadpole sized drops, no less. I was curious as to their motivation and the determination of these observers to be with us during that sacred ceremony. With subtle side eye scanning, the serene monk like kind, I tried to keep my peaceful gaze intact while doing some quick math. Best I could tell, there were over 400 people present, many who had minimal or no direct affiliation with thy monastery. They came to witness our transformation, and somehow that was both awe inspiring and absolutely nerve shredding. Rarely in my life have I felt as relieved as I did when it became clear that I had led my Sangha without incident. No tripping, no slipping, no accidental flying lacquer platters, and my slow, stately pace had been pulled off with grace. As I took my seat at the head of the U, I allowed myself a deep breath. The hard part, I thought, was done. Now I could retreat into my own little bubble and just be a ceremonial monk for a while. Then I turned, looked across the great divide past my chair, the low slung table, and to the other side, and locked eyes with Fornsan Kamlangek, who was beaming at me with what can only be described as maternal pride. And just like that, my nervous system rebooted back into DEFCON 1. The first ceremony after our grand entrance and seating was the public participation hair snipping. Step right up, folks, and don't forget your scissors. My person, the matriarch of the entire monastic order, kicked off the ritual by clipping a few strands of my hair, placing them gently on the banana leaf placemat draped over the platter in my lap. We exchanged greetings, at which point she said something that blew my mind. She was honored to serve as my mother for the day. She said that quietly, kindly, and with sincerity I could feel. I tumbled into ease within seconds of her pronouncement. After that brief moment, she moved on to the next monk in progress, as a new person approached me, smiling warmly, wielding sharp scissors. Everyone had incredibly kind things to say, or, for those not fluent in English, offered big, beaming smiles that lit up their whole face. Or they would place a gentle hand on my shoulder in a manner that conveyed, "It's all going to be okay." They'd lock eyes like I was the only soul in the universe, and then snip, off came another chunk of my ego. Our California Rasta dreadlocks dyed a golden sunburst, and our tall, affable Russian, whose flowing blonde mane gave off strong Bee Gees circa 1978 vibes, were especially popular with the scissor happy crowd. But once the initial carnage had passed, and everyone who wanted to go had had their ceremonial snip, it was time for phase two, the full head shave. Only ordained monks are allowed to perform this next part of the ritual, which I found oddly comforting. At least I wouldn't end up the victim of some rogue Buddhist fangirl or boy reenacting a Sweeney Todd moment in the jungle. It's Thailand. Stranger things have happened. As my new mom for the day sat across from me, we chatted quietly about life. How funny it is. How unpredictable it can be. How sometimes you wake up thinking it's a normal rainy day and end up bald in front of 400 strangers. Fornson was gracious, deeply kind, and effortlessly present in that way powerful people sometimes are, like they've spent time to sit with you. For a fleeting moment, I felt like being Bante wasn't just an odd cosmic joke. I felt deeply honored to fill that role, and promised myself I would do it with grace through the rest of my tenure. That's when I noticed the monk standing behind me with razor in hand wasn't just any monk. It was my monk, the abbot, Venerable Narong Chai Thunjayo, a man of razor sharp intellect, warm humor, and a smile that could melt or incinerate depending on the context. His usual smile was radiant and generous, but I'd also seen his "Did you really just say that?" version, a smile so dry it could start a brush fire. I glanced up at him just as he was poised for the ceremonial first scrape and whispered, "You've done this before, right?" With a wink. Without missing a beat, he giggled. Yes, my abbot giggled, then placed a hand gently on my shoulder and replied, "Maybe. A jokester with a razor. Perfect. Dip in the water, scrape, dip, scrape, repeat." As he shaved my head bald for the first time since I emerged from the womb, my mom for the day and I kept talking about her life, my life, love, loss, change, the whole pad thai. I swear I could feel waves of energy pulsing off her like she was a benevolent force field. I noticed that wherever she walked, people moved, not out of fear, but reverence. The kind of reverence that says, "This woman probably knows where all the bodies are buried and has blessed each site personally." By the time I was smooth as a cue ball and feeling like my scalp was made of industrial grade micro Velcro, it was time to lead our band of baldies back up the slick steps to the longhouse. There, more monks waited, ready to inspect for stray hairs. And just when we thought it was over, we got a treat: a nice, bracing splash of cold mountain water to rinse off nicks, cuts, and what little ego remained. I was lucky I escaped without bloodshed. Others looked like they'd headbutted a rose bush. Kop kun krab, Venerable Narong Chai. That's thank you, sir, in Thai. Though in that moment I meant, thanks for not turning my scalp into a bloody battleground, sir. We were instructed to change into new, pure white front button shirts that looked vaguely Indian, the next layer in our ceremonial cake, as the first stage of our transformation was complete. Much like a kurta shirt, but shorter, we huddled around steaming cups of hot tea, trying to thaw out from the damp chill while waiting to be summoned for the next ceremonial phase of the day. It was then, sipping tea and assessing the damage, that we collectively realized just how profoundly a face changes when it's stripped of hair and eyebrows. The effect was disorienting. Guys I'd been brushing teeth next to all week suddenly looked like strangers. There were some hard blinks and puzzled stares, the kind you give someone at a reunion when you're 70% sure they were in your class, but 100% unsure if that's their original face. That middle stage of ceremony, the gifting of our saffron robes and alms bowls, would lead up to the culmination of our long, soggy day. Monks are not allowed to buy their own robes or alms bowls. Those must be donated. This is one of the primary reasons you'll see donation boxes at Buddhist monasteries all over the world. Dressing a monk, it turns out, is expensive. Enlightenment may be free, but the dry cleaning isn't. And then it was time. I gathered my newly minted cue ball crew and led my sangha down the slippery steps again as music blasted from the speakers. All the while, the ever cheerful MC rattled off announcements about upcoming monastery events and ways to help, donate, or get involved with our community outreach programs. Honestly, she was having a blast. I'm pretty sure she could have sold raffle tickets and t shirts and no one would have batted an eye. We took our seats once more, sitting a little taller, a little prouder. We were only a day away from full ordination now. There was still some chanting to do to bring everyone into the right headspace, and so we dove in. Thankfully, we'd been rehearsing these chants for over a week, so memory kicked in and we entered that sweet fake it till you make it zone, our mouths moving more or less in time with the syllables, our souls catching up as best they could. Back at our assigned stations, our seats had vanished while we were up in the longhouse, sacrificed to the gods of sacred ceremony setup. This was the most solemn part of the day, the moment our sponsors, our people, or in my case, my newly adopted ceremonial mom, would present us with our robes. There were songs, there were speeches. There was a stately presentation by our abbot and the head abbot of the entire Dhammakaya order, all performed with the kind of precision usually reserved for royal coronations. The robe package was elaborate: two jiwan, one for everyday wear and a second one for special occasions, because monks need formal wear too. Our sabong or lower wraps, a cloth belt, and the piece de resistance, the golden sash that tied it all together. Think Buddhist haute couture, monk edition. We had been instructed to kneel in humble supplication, feet under bottoms, knees screaming in protest on the mat that really was not much of a mat, heads bowed, arms outstretched like supplicants in a Renaissance painting, palms up and ready to receive our robes. As the speeches stretched on into eternity, or at least far enough to consider faking a fainting spell, the packages were finally, mercifully placed into our aching arms. Then came the final act, the gifting of our alms bowls, or pata. These beautifully crafted, enameled brass bowls came with their own saffron colored cloth hammocks, the ultimate monk accessory. Thankfully, this part was brief. Once the bowls were placed in our hands, we were told to rise, our knees sending up little tiny prayers of gratitude. Ceremony concluded, I once again led my bald brethren up the slippery stairs to the longhouse, where seasoned monks helped us don our new saffron robes. Wrapped in orange for the first time, we descended once more into a crowd of tearful, proud faces. It felt monumental. Then came the paparazzi. Suddenly, we were in a full blown monk themed photo shoot. Cameras everywhere directing us into every imaginable pose. Videographers captured all of it while trying to stay out of sightline of the DSLRs. We were herded, grouped, regrouped. People we didn't know gushed with admiration. If this is what it felt like to be famous, I had serious empathy for Princess Diana and the tabloid betrayals that tried to destroy her. The symbolism of it all hit like a tidal wave. We were now public figures of a sort, stand ins for purity and discipline. No pressure. Back at the monastery, the mood shifted. You might expect celebration, camaraderie, or a rowdy late night tea party of reliving epic moments and sharing spiritual epiphanies. But none of that happened. Instead, we quietly peeled off in different directions, like leaves blown loose from a branch. No goodbyes, no see you at breakfast, not even a knowing nod, just a slow, almost reverent dispersal into the jungle darkness. Something had settled over us. Not exhaustion exactly, though we were all bone tired. It was the weight of meaning. The ceremony had delivered a sort of finality that I felt inside, and now each of us had to sit with whatever had taken up residence. I slipped into my tent. The silence outside was deafening, and for the first time since I had arrived, I didn't feel isolated from the world. Ordination Day. I woke at 3 a.m., an hour ahead of schedule and a full 90 minutes before the first gong. It was dark. Not just dark, but mountainous, monastic dark. Even the bathroom portico lights had been turned off, which made me wonder if our wise, all knowing monks had intentionally killed the lights, knowing we'd be too nervous to sleep. Those guys were mystical clairvoyants with the bedtime instincts of Victorian nannies. We'd spent the past week preparing for this, memorizing two crucial lines we'd have to recite to our preceptor monk, ideally without butchering them into incomprehensible Pali gibberish. My monk name, Satibalo, means man of many abilities, which felt dishonest because memorization was not among my abilities. Not even a little. November 7th, a day of transformation. Did I mention it was cold? Colder than anything we'd felt yet up in our mountain hideaway. And of course, that day, when we'd be standing outside for much of it, it was the coldest day yet. It was also pouring, huge fat drops soaking everything in their earthbound path. That rain came with a chilled wraith that made me question every decision I'd made leading up to that day. After our usual morning routines, plus bonus touch up shaves for the baby faced guys whose hair grows faster than gossip in a small town, we prepared for the biggest moment of our monastic lives. All other duties were suspended. Today there was only one job: take the vows, enter monkhood. No more training wheels, no more powder blue sabong and yellow sweatshirt. This was it. And despite the numbing rain, chilled feet, and a brain stubbornly refusing to recall line 2 of the Pali chant, I was ready. As I wrote above, rote memorization is not, nor has it ever been, a talent I've possessed. In fact, the more important the memorization, the more my brain decides to throw a jazz riff into the mix. Improvising with heart? Sure, while withholding precision. I always get there, just not in the way instructors or solemn faced preceptor monks might prefer. My brain is less recitation engine and more interpretive monologue. Given time, I can deliver. Give me a few days? Absolutely not. When they handed us the ordination study sheet, paragraph upon paragraph of ceremonial lines, chants, and call and response Pali, I experienced what can only be described as full body academic panic. There were whole call and response scripts, stories, and verbal obstacle courses. And then there were the two key lines, my solo, to be performed directly to the preceptor monk, at a special hall, miles away, in front of everyone. The make or break moment of the entire monastic rite. That's all. Again, no pressure. We donned our robes, or more accurately, I attempted to assemble my robe ensemble like a blindfolded chimpanzee attacking an origami kit. Thankfully, Luang P. Fop, my patient monk pal and now unofficial spiritual stylist, intervened before I could debut as a Picasso version of a monk. He gently pulled me aside and, with the quiet competence of a man who's done this hundreds of times, turned me into someone who looked like I belonged. I had nailed the sabong and belt, the monk version of pants, but the jiwan, the elaborate upper body wrap that had to be folded and draped just so, I was a complete disaster. Wrapping an enormous rectangular cloth around my torso with monastic elegance was not my strong suit. At this point, it was too late to back out. I was on the bus, as Cowboy Neil would say, and there you have it. You pay for your ticket, you take the ride. Loaded into two vans, we drove through misty mountain villages and fields of waving rice on our way to the ordination center, a 200-year-old ordination hall. So, yeah, brand new. Perched in the middle of a picturesque rice paddy, golden grains ripened around it like something out of a spiritual fairy tale as they shivered and shook with the onslaught of raindrops. A crowd of over 100 lay people had already gathered. Word had clearly gotten out that fresh monk was in season. Thankfully, our monastery monks once again played wardrobe supervisor, adjusting our robes and wiping our brows, making sure we looked the part. If I learned anything on this journey, it's that the Thai paparazzi are deeply committed to capturing a perfectly robed monk. The camera cranes and umbrella holding assistants made it feel more like a red carpet procession than a sacred ritual. It was time for me to be Bante again, the ceremonial starter pistol. My role was to light incense and candles and place them at the altar outside of the ordination hall in specific order, without screwing up. This had to be executed perfectly, or we'd have to cancel the ceremony and come back another time. I didn't want to be that guy. Just me, a side pavilion full of monks, 13 anxious fellow almost monks, a full audience, and enough camera lenses to film a Marvel reboot. I managed my role without a hitch because, well, I may have the recitation memory capabilities of a steel I beam, simple processes I can nail. Then came the hard part. Inside the tiny, ornate, airless ordination hall, packed wall to wall with monks lining the walls, we'd each go through our ordination in groups of three. As Bante, I was in the first group. Yay? Each round would take about 30 minutes of kneeling on wooden floors, back straight, feet folded under our butts like some kind of medieval Pilates challenge, palms pressed in prayer, sweat beating down our backs. We'd respond in Pali, line by line, to our preceptor, a wise ancient monk flown in like some ceremonial final boss, whom we'd never met. We trained for this all week. The rhythm, the logic of it had started to make sense. That is, until we hit the solo vows, the part where I, as Satipolo, had to recite my part from memory, in front of everyone, and promise to uphold 227 precepts, to live cleanly, purely, honorably, intellectually, and spiritually. It was time. Preceptor, Kinamosi. Aham Bante Satibalo Nana, I would respond. Preceptor, Ko Nama Te Upaji Hajo. Upaji Hajo no Bante Ayasama Katadahamo. Nama. That would be my second response. Two short call and response lines. That happened to carry the weight of a supertanker. That was all I needed to memorize. You could commit them to memory in minutes, even if only phonetically. But my brain doesn't work that way. If it hadn't been for one of my kind, understanding teaching monks gently guiding me through the ceremony and subtly mouthing the lines in my line of sight, I might have been expelled from ordination. I need to understand, to feel the words, to grasp their meaning through translation before they can lodge themselves in my mind and heart. But there was no direct translation available. I nearly blew it, squeaking out my lines like a terrified little mouse. My dear brothers, who knew of my struggle with memorization, were sympathetic and supportive. I wish they'd laid on more pressure, cracked the whip a little, if only to get my brain to shape up and deliver, but they had their own lines to remember, their own tightrope to walk. In the end, I got through it. Not an Oscar worthy performance by any means, but it was enough to satisfy the preceptor. As I rose, the weight of what I had just done crashed down on me like the Titanic hitting the ocean floor. I walked out, legs shaking from pain and tension, surrounded by doting monks shielding me with umbrellas. And then, just like that, I was outside again, under a slate gray sky, with rain pouring down, cleansing me with grace. As I reached for my sandals, I asked my fellow monks to keep their umbrellas for someone else. I didn't want protection. I wanted to feel it. I needed the earth to drench me in her tears, to mark this moment, raw, sacred, and real. I walked barefoot back toward the covered pavilion, toward the cameras and the crowd of well wishers, who waited with alms and balms, knowing what we had just endured physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The gathering after ordination had the texture of something ancient and sacred, something that didn't need words to explain itself. The air was thick with reverence, not just for tradition, but for the simple act of devotion that each person had come to honor. There was love in their eyes, unmistakable and unself conscious. It poured out toward us like warmth from a hearth, steady and undeniable. Their joy was not for spectacle, it was for what we had become. I felt the first dissonance of my new role, my new persona. As monks, we were not permitted to bow in recognition or respect. The gesture that had always been second nature passed back and forth with dignity. That was now reserved only for the laity. We could only receive it. It felt disrespectful and false to not mirror their humility, their generosity and love. I wanted to tell them, with the tilt of my head or a simple folding of hands, that I saw them too, that I honored their presence, their hopes, their sacrifices, their prayers. But tradition asked for stillness instead of response. It asked that I wear the mantle of monkhood with a solemnity that didn't bend back. As more groups entered the ordination hall to complete their ordination, the sky began to soften. The rain that had fallen hard all morning thinned to a mist, and the air turned thick with rising heat. I felt a growing urge to step away from the press of people, to carve out a moment of silence for myself, to listen inward. But that silence would have to wait. The crowd, now gathered under the covered portico, had waited through that soggy day to meet us. Their offerings, red good luck envelopes filled with bot, of which to a man was donated back to the monastery for our children's education fund, wrapped gifts, pressed palms, and whispered prayers, were as much a part of the ceremony as the ancient chants spoken inside the hall. Among the gifts, each of us received a box of herbal balms, a quiet gesture of empathy from those who knew what the body suffers in stillness. I held court for a time, speaking when asked, blessing those who came forward, receiving all that was given. Eventually, the tide of attention receded as the next group came out of the hall as monks, and in the hush that followed, I slipped away. Not far, but just far enough to become no one again for a few minutes. I opened the balm box and unscrewed the bottle marked extra strong. The scent hit me. Sharp, herbal, elemental. It was as if the land itself had sent it. I rubbed it into my knees, my thighs, the arches of my feet. The sting came first, then the warmth, and finally a slow, blooming relief that felt almost holy. Of all the things I had been handed that day, it was this, the simplest, humblest bottle, that felt most immediate, most merciful. I would donate the envelopes and the other gifts, but the small bottles and the comfort they gave, those I would keep. And done with chapter 9. Have you guys been enjoying it so far? Excuse me one moment. Thank you for your patience. An Arminius will be with you in a moment. Hopefully, you guys have been enjoying this as our author is now an ordained monk. I am certain I butchered some of that Pali in there, but hey, I warned you guys at the beginning. As a reminder, if you want to see how it's actually written out and everything else, gotta pick up the book. The Flow, a Hedonist Guide to Buddhism, Meditation, and Travels in Thailand. Available, I know, at least on Amazon and possibly elsewhere. And now, let's dive in for the next chapter, shall we? Chapter 9, Alms Rounds, a Beggar in the Wilderness. Big gestures get applause. Small ones change people. Guess which one Buddha would have upvoted. We were now fully ordained monks in the Dhammakaya order, and everything shifted. Some things subtly, others like the earth tilting a few degrees on its axis. Our interactions with our teachers changed, imperceptibly at first. The tone softened into mutual regard. The distance shortened. Where once there had been gentle guidance from above, there was now a back and forth, a give and take. The bows remained. Monks bowed to each other all the time. But so did a sense that we had stepped through a doorway into a different kind of brotherhood. One built on shared vows, robes, shared insight, and silent moments that screamed loudly. But the biggest change for me came with the knowledge that we would soon go on alms rounds, dana, in the mountain villages beyond our monastery grounds. Not through tidy streets with designated paths like city monks where food is gifted as predictably as the sunrise. No, we would walk into the remote highlands, places so far flung that some were nothing more than rumors hidden among rocky folds of mist and memory. Among my newly ordained brothers, this practice stirred something uneasy. We spoke in low tones about under the pomelo and teak trees, our saffron robes brushing dust as we paced and pondered. The idea of becoming beggars, because that is what the Pali word for monk truly means, left many of us uneasy, some even ashamed at the next step. We had grown up in lives where food came easy, where need was theoretical. We were the givers of canned goods and charitable checks, not the ones with open hands. Now we were to walk into the lives of people who had so little, and as wordlessly, for more. To take rice from the hands of those who lived day by day, hand to mouth, felt backwards, morally crooked. It cut against everything we've been taught to admire in ourselves: independence, contribution, the quiet nobility of not needing anything. Some of us tried to reason our way through it. Maybe this was theater. Maybe the villagers did it out of habit or obligation. Maybe they didn't really miss the food we took. After all, Hadn't we eaten more than our share at the monastery already? Meals abundant, meticulously prepared, never once lacking. Still, I couldn't shake the question. What right did I have to ask for more from those who already had so little? It was a deep philosophical reckoning, one we revisited often in our debates. None of us had ever begged for food, not once. That thought alone ran against everything we'd been taught to admire: self sufficiency, contribution, control. To stand in front of another human being with an empty bowl and expect sustenance from their hands. It felt almost indecent. We didn't understand the impulse to give when one had so little to spare. It unsettled many of us. Perhaps you've seen images: monks walking silently in single file at dawn, heads bowed in humility, feet bare, saffron robes fluttering faintly in the morning breeze. They move like smoke, quiet, steady, reverent, toward villagers who kneel or sit, waiting with rice, stews, bundles of noodles, fresh fruits, and water. You see these images and think peace, grace, harmony. I saw them and felt a kind of dread. It stuck in my craw like a bad dream, being the receiver in a world where I'd always been the one offering. I didn't feel worthy of that kind of generosity. More than that, I didn't feel it was necessary. These were people with little feeding those of us who, truth be told, had so much already. Our meals at the monastery had been abundant, plentiful, sometimes even excessive. We'd never gone without. How could I, in good conscience, hold out my bowl? What we hadn't yet grasped was the root of their giving. Despite our long debates and sincere efforts to understand both sides of the alms ritual, we were still missing something essential. Why give when it hurts to do so? Why offer up what might be needed for one's own child or aging parent? Only later would I put two and two together and begin to understand that the food we received came not from surplus, but from sacrifice, and that this, perhaps, was the point. Our monastery was fed not only by local farmers, many of whom grew crops expressly for us, but also by donors from across Thailand and beyond. Some were former monks from our program, returned to the world but still tethered by memory and gratitude. Others gave anonymously, shipment of food and funds. And it wasn't just for us. That abundance, so generously offered, often became surplus. Surplus that allowed the monastery to extend its own alms outward, to struggling schools, to village clinics, to families in need. There was an interlinked ecosystem at play, a circle of giving where nobody held on to what they could pass along. And I had to ask myself, was I really at the bottom of that circle? Or was I simply unused to standing still and holding my hands open? Sometimes the offerings were meager and slim, other times astonishing in their generosity. I remember walking past the sorting tables near the kitchen, where enormous stacks of brand new fleece blankets lay folded in crisp rows, still carrying the scent of the factory. They had arrived as a single anonymous donation and were already being prepared for redonation to two mountain communities far beyond the last bend in the road, villages whose names didn't appear on maps. These were places so remote that the floods of September and October had stranded them in darkness for weeks, with no power, little clean water, and only the fading hope that someone might still be thinking of them. The blankets would bring not just warmth, but proof that the world hadn't forgotten about them. We, the newly minted monks, couldn't yet understand such acts of giving. We debated them in our hushed corners of reflection, trying to trace the motivations. Some suggested guilt, the karmic calculus of the privileged, paying spiritual dues with tangible gifts. Others believed it to be obligation dressed up as virtue. But none of those explanations fully accounted for the softness of those blankets, the thoughtfulness of their timing, or the way they would be carried, on foot, in silence, into villages more sky than road. That day would open up something in us. Slowly, and in different ways for each man, our understanding began to shift. What we thought we knew of generosity, of need, of giving and receiving, would melt and reshape itself. It wasn't about the food or the blankets or even the material exchange. It was about something far older and deeper than that, something quiet, humane, and universal. We were beginning to understand that compassion, true compassion, doesn't measure the cost. It gives because it must, because it can, because to withhold would wound something sacred. In that unfolding, we too were changed. Friday dawned cold, 39 degrees Fahrenheit and raining. Not a mist or a drizzle, but big, fat, unhurried raindrops that seemed to fall straight from the gut of the sky and go splat. It had only been 2 days since we'd taken our vows, formally entering the I Monastery fraternity as Luang Pi, brother monks in the Theravada tradition, and now we were to go on our first alms round. We would walk as real monks, honest to goodness, shaven headed, robed mendicants, into the folds of the high mountain villages that clung to the hills like moss to stone. It was still dark when we climbed into two Toyota pickups. The sky had just begun to smudge with light along the eastern ridge, dawn unspooling in threads. Our caravan crept slowly, quietly up toward a village we would receive food from those who, by all Western logic, could least afford to give it. Alms rounds are never random. They're not something you just throw together. These routes and visits are organized well in advance and negotiated between the elders of the monastery and those of each village. You don't just show up, 15 monks deep with bowls in hand like door to door salesmen at sunrise, expecting a welcome committee and a pot of jasmine rice. Those urban alms routes do not exist in the rural highlands. There are no plastic stools, no tidy queues of merit seekers, no daily routes. The villagers needed notice. They must wake up early, cook rice, prepare stews, gather fruit, bag up little care packages of chips or cookies, and pour juice or water into bottles to give. And of course, no one village can support the full weight of 15 hungry monks every week. That kind of karmic enthusiasm would wipe out their pantries. Going forward, we'd be sent out in smaller groups, 4 monks here, 4 monks there, sharing the load across the scattered hill communities. Alms are gifts, not obligations. There's no sense in showing up like a Buddhist locust swarm. Our first outing wasn't just about sustenance. Yes, we'd gather food for the communal tables back at I Monastery, but more than that, this was a lesson, a living, breathing tutorial in humility. A chance to see, for many of us, the first time in our lives what generosity actually looks like when it isn't performative or tax deductible. Being Bante, I was ordered, really, to ride inside the truck cab with the heat on, nestled behind the driver along with another monk on crutches and Luang P. Fop. The rest of my Sangha huddled under tarps in the bed of the trucks, shielding themselves from the wet and cold as best they could. I argued my position that I needed to be in the back with my Sangha, leadership by example. And I meant it. I wanted to be with my brothers, cold and wet and equally miserable. But Luang P. What, my teacher and friend, gave me a look, one that spoke volumes, immediately closing the argument as if slamming a book shut. We had been carefully robed for the day, dressed like textbook monks, every fold and pleat just so. But the chill was real, and so was my fleece beanie, my thick socks stuffed into Birkenstocks, and the blanket I had smuggled into the truck like a guilty pleasure. I bundled into them while I could, knowing the time would come to shed the layers, physical and metaphysical, and step outside into my role. I Monastery is tucked into a small valley in the Thanan Thong Chai Range. surrounded on all sides by mountains whose peaks snagged clouds like prayer flags. We wound our way up muddy switchbacks, through mist and rain, to the village of Lochi, a place known for its highland rice and, and tea plantations. The road narrowed with each turn until it was hardly more than a ribbon of mud, wide enough for a truck and a dog to pass each other without an argument. Eventually, we reached the top of Lochi, where the village elder had arranged for us to begin. Our trucks rolled into the broad, flat driveway of an ancient, large teak wood house or barn. I couldn't determine what it was. The engines died, and a thick, blanketing silence fell like a curtain. It was time to take off my beanie. Time to fold the blanket, remove the socks and sandals. Time to stop being a comfort seeking Westerner and step into the quiet, ancient rhythm of the monk's walk, high up on the mountain. The first thing I noticed as I stepped down from the truck was that the air had changed. It was thicker up there, sweet and saturated, like the forest had exhaled something thick just for us. The chill was still there, but it carried less bite, softened somehow by mist and altitude. And then, of course, my feet landed directly in a puddle of muddy, cold mountain water. That, and the wet nose of a village dog introducing himself to my rear end, brought me back from any lofty thoughts. One of dozens, it turned out. The dogs kept close, shadowing our group like shaggy, silent sentinels. Not begging, not barking, just there, shadowing our every step. I figured it must be the robes vibe. We didn't feed them, we didn't pet them, but they followed anyway. Maybe they sensed we were trying to be decent. It was time. Time to cinch the invisible strap of monkish resolve, put on my metaphorical walking meditation hat, and forget the rain soaking my jiwan. I had taken vows. I wore the robes. Now I had to walk the walk. Each of us slung our pata across our shoulders, the large black orb nestled in its sling. That's when I noticed, taped securely to the lid in large type, was a printed blessing we were to recite in unison to each almsgiver. A divine cheat sheet. In the other hand, we held umbrellas. I managed to hang on to mine for exactly 2 holms before I surrendered it back to our driver. Hard to balance an umbrella when you're lifting a bowl while hanging onto the lid to accept generosity from someone you feel unworthy to even look in the eye. I gave in to the drizzle. Moments later, the rain eased to a gentle mist. I'd like to think the universe gave me a nod for letting go and let karma weave her spell. 17 of us, all newly minted monks with our senior monk guides at the lead, lined up by height through, though as Bante, I was placed right behind Luang P. Wat at the front of the line. Our feet found the steep, muddy slope of the village road, more like a wide trail carved into the ridge. The place looked like it had grown up from the earth rather than being built. Houses of slatted wood rose on stilts, balanced like nesting birds on the edge of steep terraces. Tawdry plastic sheets flapped softly where windows might have been, if there was plastic at all. Many window portals were open and uncovered. Dogs, cats, pigs, ducks, and chickens moved about like they owned the place, which, in a way, they did. The first dwelling we came to was 2 levels. The bottom open space, a rudimentary slat-board wall facing the street with a dirt floor. Inside housed a scooter, a couple of bicycles, laundry hanging in the dark to the rear, and a large, ancient, blackened stone brazier where an equally ancient large metal cauldron hung over the fire on wooden crossbeam supports, cooking breakfast for the family. Upstairs were the living quarters, the slats again, spaced apart so it must have been quite cold and damp at night. Animals roamed about, checking us out and altering the neighborhood that those strange guys in robes were back. We stopped, waited, forward. The village exhaled around us. Then an elderly couple emerged with overfilled baskets, hand already pressed in Y. Their neighbors joined them. No announcements were made, nor doorbells chimed, and no cell phones rung, just a silent, understood rhythm. Sai Bat, the offering of food, of love, of memory. One by one, we received gifts of sticky rice, fried pork rinds, bottles of water, packages of ramen, bags of stew, all placed with quiet hands into our bowls. Then came a moment I hadn't expected. The couple crouched low on their haunches, uncapped small bottles, and began to pour water slowly onto the earth, while Luang Pi Wat began to chant. I learned later it was a ritual for the dead, a blessing for departed loved ones. The water, symbolic of a life poured forth, or the watering of future abundance. It was a kind of gesture Tolkien might have tucked into a forced ritual among elves. Yet here it was, real, muddy, sacred. We chanted our awkward blessing, our taped cheat sheets trembling as shaky hands in the mist tried to hold steady through the solemnity of the moment. We sounded like a drunken choir of tone deaf monks, but the villagers smiled, not in mockery, not in pity, but in a kind of warm hearted understanding, as if they were saying, "You'll get it, in time." And I believed them. We continued, from primitive house to primitive house. Some gave, some didn't. All welcomed us. Even as families bustled with their mornings, cooking, tending livestock, ushering children to school, they made space for us in their rhythm. They had prepared for this. Woken early, cooked extra, waited in the rain. Not because they had extra to give, but because they wanted to, always with smiles that reached into our hearts. The villagers obviously had no wealth that we Westerners would identify as such. Many of them had disfigured feet from a lifetime of toiling in fields with no shoes. The hard labor life of subsistence farming was evident in the lines mapping lives on faces, while the dirt under their nails looked like it belonged there. And yet their clothing was immaculate, clean and pressed as they crouched at their driveways in the rain. What struck me most after the fourth or fifth house was the very real joy, the loving adoration and devotion that was evident in these people's eyes as they filled our bowls again and again with nourishment. I was taken aback. I was taken by surprise. I was flabbergasted. While some of the houses we stopped at were tidy and tightly built, some of them looked to be barely standing or to be able to withstand the slightest gust of wind. It was at those homes that the alms offerings seemed to be even more generous. Our drivers, who were quietly following in the trucks at a discreet distance, would come between our stops with larger bins to collect what had been given to us in our bowls. I suddenly became acutely aware, as if a brightly lit diamond shot into my forehead, that I felt ashamed. Ashamed of my assumptions and my complete lack of understanding of what it meant to be rich. My assumptions that these people were poor related entirely to my upbringing, my life, and the expectations of success and of what it meant to be wealthy in Western society. I was ashamed to think that these lives, these beautiful people, centered around an ancient stone brazier and a slat board hovel, where the comforts of material wealth were completely absent, that was poverty. I realized that my life, until recently, was an abomination of the human spirit. These people, living simply, were the richest, most soulful, beautiful human beings I had ever encountered. They wanted for nothing. They didn't need a fancy house or cars, a wine cellar with Rydell glasses, steak or lobster or foie gras served on hand painted Italian pottery to show their dinner guests how sophisticated they were. These seemingly simple people were wealthier in spirit and love, with a deep, soulful sophistication, than anyone I'd ever met. You could see it in their eyes, their smiles, that they were more comfortable in their skins and lives than we were. It was an epiphany unlike anything I'd learned before, and I was humbled to my very core. That singular experience has forever changed the way I look at humanity. The vanity of excess that I had lived, not seeing it as such, was suddenly ugly. bereft of the soulful happiness that I was witnessing. And in that moment, trudging along in our line of monks through a fog wrapped village perched on the bones of the mountains, I realized for the first time in a very long time I wanted nothing. I just wanted to be worthy of the gift of being here. I felt light. As we wound our way down through the mountainside village, time after time, house after house, person after person gave with love, respect, and humility, supporting their local monastery, with the hope that those gifts of nourishment would see us through our journey. All they asked for in return was a simple blessing to see them through their journey, their day and week ahead. By the time we reached our final stop, a modest tea producer whose quiet generosity kept the monastery's tea tins full and steaming throughout the year, we were no longer the same monks who had climbed out of those trucks hours earlier. Everything had shifted. You could feel it in the way we held our bowls, in the softened focus of our eyes, in the slower, more deliberate rhythm of our steps and breath. We arrived that morning as newcomers, freshly minted bhikkhus, cloaked in wet robes and good, but we left as men changed, not by theory or scripture, but by sticky right and the radiant dignity of people who gave until it hurt and smiled anyways. This wasn't begging, not even close. This was the ancient heartbeat of mutual understanding, a sacred barter of need and nourishment. We offered presence, assistance, community, and blessings. They offered food, effort, and something less tangible, something that shimmered like the mist that clung to the ridgelines. Grace or love in a more elemental form. As we began loading up the trucks, my bowl lighter but my heart considerably fuller, Luang Pi Fop caught my eye. His smile was a quiet lantern in the fog. He walked over to me, his steps unhurried, his robe swaying like the mist-wrapped branches of a cypress in a gentle breeze. He placed a hand on my shoulder, not to steady me, but to anchor something between us. His eyes, ageless and amused, searched mine for a flicker of recognition, and when he found it, he nodded once. "Would you like to come with me on Tuesday?" he asked, the question soft but lit with purpose. "Smaller village, 3 or 4 monks." He already knew my answer, but I gave it to him anyway. I would be deeply honored. The ride back to the monastery was quiet. It had started to rain again shortly after our last blessing recitation. I got back in the truck, glad for the blanket I had brought with me in the early hours of cold that morning. I used it to wipe first my tears, then my feet. I came to the realization that at some point during the 30 some odd stops we had made at homes that I now looked up upon with fondness, that I had forgotten that I was barefoot, sidestepping hungry leeches, walking through rivulets of cold mountain rainwater on steep, muddy lanes. As I wiped my feet down and dried them off, I was about to put my thick, warm socks back on, then stopped, realizing I didn't need them anymore. The following Tuesday, I joined Luang, P. Fop, Emiliano, and Peter for alms rounds to a much smaller village, one that could generously be called a hamlet. Again, it was dark, barely heading into the first inklings of pale dawn. We'd been on the main track for about a mile when our driver veered up a very steep path, one that could charitably be described as a goat track if the goat was drunk and didn't mind landslides. There was no sign, no trailhead, no indication that human beings had any business up there at all. It was one of those roads where the jungle closed behind you as the entrance disappears the moment you take it, as if the mountain itself was swallowing you up to keep its secrets. We climbed slowly, steadily in the truck, and the tires slipping now and then in the soft red mud, and I realized this wasn't a village in the usual sense. This was going to be a speck of a community, maybe a dozen rustic houses and a spirit shrine. When we finally reached the end of the track, we stepped out and began walking along a narrow ridge, the air thinner, cleaner, and brighter than it had any right to be. You could feel the altitude in your chest and in your thoughts, both a little harder to hold on to. Before we reached the first house, Luang P. Fop stopped us. He gently took my shoulders in his hands and, with the grace of someone turning a dial to tune in a faint frequency, rotated me about 40 degrees. Look, he said softly, his eyes already reflecting what I hadn't yet seen. There, across the wide, deep ravine, rising from a flat topped mountain like something conjured from Scripture, was a tree. Not just any tree, a colossus of the forest. It towered above every other living thing for miles. Gnarled and noble, its crown touched the waking sky, as the breadth of its canopy spread over everything else on that ridgetop, catching the first fire of morning. Blazing from behind like a golden halo, the sun began its climb, creating the theatrical backlighting that Nolan only dreamt of. A few wisps of mist curled around its massive trunk like they knew they didn't belong higher. It was the Tree of Souls, not just from Avatar, but from every story ever told where something ancient, sacred, and alive waited for you to notice it. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't speak. Amazing, isn't it? Luang Pi Fop said softly, his voice projecting a quiet and encompassing reverence. He sounded almost sorry, like he'd interrupted a prayer he didn't mean to overhear. I nodded, unable to answer, because something in me had profoundly shifted. That tree wasn't just a tree, it was a memory, it was history, it was power, and it owned the wisdom of ages. The grieving my soul had been tortured with was launched heart first into bas relief as I gazed upon its magnificence, while that hero of times past and present waited patiently across the ravine for all to understand. It had been there the whole time, through it all. I couldn't look away as I burst into tears. And everyone, I think that is going to be a good place for us to stop tonight. We made it through chapters 8 and 9. Next week, we'll start in next week, Saturday. So far away, so very far away. We'll dive into chapter 10, Chiang Rai, Chiang Rai, and the Golden Triangle. I hope you guys have enjoyed this reading tonight. These chapters, of course, will be up on the YouTube channel a little bit later this evening for your re listening pleasure, or if you missed any of it, to be able to pick up on. I'm going to be honest. If there's one chapter I would have people listen to, make it chapter 9. Share chapter 9 with people. I think that was a fantastic and meaningful chapter. Share it. Give some love to our author, Lawrence Davidson, Larry Davidson, The Flow, A Hedonist Guide to Buddhism, Meditation, and Travels in Thailand, a travelogue memoir. Wherever you happen to be, if you're listening to this, like, subscribe, follow, whatever those free options are, so that way you get notified when I go live next. I appreciate it. Helps me to continue to grow and to be able to do the things that I do, to read these books to all of you. Thank you all so much for being here with me tonight. The greatest gift that you can give me is the gift of your time. And I appreciate that you guys gave me the gift of yours this evening, whether it was for 5 minutes or the full hour and a half. I will be back on Thursday with some Mech Warrior Online Stompy Mech Night. I will, of course, continue to read our Battletech book at that time, Tactics of Duty. And then Saturday, I will be back to continue the reading of The Flow. If you can't wait, and there's a good possibility that you can't, pick up the book. Read it along with me as I go, or read it to yourself. and still come along with me. Hey, why not? Thank you all so much. Have yourselves a wonderful evening, and I will see you guys all again really soon. Good night, all.